once you identify your purpose, your dharma, your true work in life, your duty is to perform those actions that lead to success in that endeavor. Mm-hmm. You're simply dropping the attachment to the results.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions. I'm Deborah Burnt Maldonado. I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado. How are you doing today, Rob?
Pretty good, thank you.
And we have a great episode today. It is about Gandhi as we continue and finalize our series on the great minds of philosophy. Before we begin, I would love for you to subscribe to our channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, there's a button here in the corner. Click on it and you get to subscribe. So Gandhi, everyone knows who Gandhi is pretty much. He's an incredible inspiration to many, many people.
Yeah, he's certainly an icon. Mm-hmm. And so it's difficult to talk about icons because there is so much mythology around them.
And he wasn't a perfect person. He was not a perfect husband. And, there's a lot of stories. But I think we have to remember that all people have human sides as well, and not to over-glamorize them, but appreciate what they bring.
Well, that's the remarkable aspect of his work, is that he is a human being or was a human being like us, and yet was able to accomplish this incredible feat. Not single-handedly, of course. He was an organizer in the sense he was a community person, very much so. But certainly he was the spearhead of a great movement that ultimately liberated India
from the British Empire. This tiny little bald-headed man, so incredible. So imagine he can do this in the world, that every one of us have that potential to make big change in the world. And I know a lot of our followers are really concerned about injustice and inequality and want to make a change in the world. A lot of our students in our programs, they're like, I want to change this part of society. I want to make a difference. I want to make the world a better place. We all do in this field of coaching and psychology. And he's a great person to talk about and inspire us to even when things seem impossible, or if we want to see something in the world that we like to change, that we can look back and say, look at this little man. He can do it. I can do it.
Yeah, so we wanted to focus particularly in his dependence, or his kind of leaning on the teachings in the Gita as the way he found his strength to do that. And maybe there's a lesson for us in modern times of how we can use some of these teachings for the tasks that challenge us and challenge our times.
And I know for myself, when I was first trying to get my first book published, when I was building the business and going, traveling a lot and doing speaking and holding a vision of what I wanted us to create in this world 10 years ago, I had a copy of the Gita with me all the time, and I would just open it up and it would help me with all these rich but simple ideas about how to manage the mind, because we knew that that's really what was the key to success and to making a change in the world and doing your great work. And so to me, it's been an invaluable piece of philosophy that Gandhi had that as well. It's just kind of like, okay, kind of on the right track.
Yeah, and he was also inspired by the West. He was interested in Christianity, the transcendentalist like Thoreau and Emerson. Einstein wrote this about him, which is, I love this quote. He says, "Generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this ever in flesh and blood walked upon the earth."
Oh, I just got goosebumps from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just think about the British Empire bringing it to his knees without violence, without like this wars that we have to fight. We don't have to do it with war.
Yeah. Yeah, so he had a lot to be angry about, yet he chose this path of nonviolence, of course, because from 1858 to 1947, the British occupied India and pretty much sacked it of all its wealth and diminished its people, very seriously diminished them and kind of put them in poverty, or a lot of people kind of were thrown into poverty because of that.
And they were discriminated against.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then Gandhi came in. He was a lawyer, trained in British schools, and wore a suit, and saw the injustices. And
did his early work in South Africa, and then went back to India and started his campaign. But the Gita, though, he always insisted that the Gita was his source of inspiration and kind of guidance in doing that. Because, again, he was a human being. In other words, he had to manage his anger and his frustration and his also find the courage to do this. Because nonviolence, as we'll see, it requires great courage, more than violence. A lot of us think of, soldiers kind of requiring courage. Of course they do to go into battle. But nonviolence takes it one step higher. It requires even more courage to put yourself in danger, but not strike back.
I remember very clearly a visceral response when I watched the movie Gandhi. When the soldiers were beating them, and they just stood there, fell over, and the next person, and they didn't respond. And I think people, I don't know, it was hard to see, but the mindset of a person that keeps hitting and there's no response, it kind of takes something away from that person, the hitter, the person who's harming, more than harming the person who's harmed. And it doesn't feel that way, but psychologically it makes them question, what am I doing? Like, these people aren't fighting back. And so I think that was part of it, is to get into the heads of these British soldiers to show, like, we're the bigger person, basically. And how many times in our life where we're confronted by a bully and we want to strike back, or someone who's making our life difficult and we want to strike back, and it's actually, let them be, and that's the worst, the best defense for someone. Instead of fighting back and trying to change them, you let them be, and they lose their power to keep fighting, because there's no one there to fight.
Yeah, and so nonviolence doesn't mean non-action. He always emphasized you have to act, you have to do your duty, which is very much tied to the Gita, as we'll see.
And you can resist a bully in a nonviolent way. You don't have to use violence to resist. It doesn't mean you don't resist, but you can resist in a nonviolent way.
So this is a quote from him. It says, "Nonviolence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind. It is mightier than the mightiest weapon of destruction devised by the ingenuity of man." So you can see that was the centerpiece of his philosophy, this nonviolent approach to making changes in the world. So ahimsa, which is nonviolence, the Sanskrit word for it, the Bhagavad Gita emphasizes the concept of nonviolence and duty. And that's an important piece, right, to understand that it's not only nonviolence, but it's tied to duty, to doing what you morally perceive to be the right course of action. Gandhi drew inspiration from the Gita's teachings on selfless action and non-attachment. He interpreted the Gita's call to do one's duty without attachment to the results as the foundation for his philosophy of nonviolent resistance. For Gandhi, nonviolence was not just a political strategy, but a way of life deeply rooted in spiritual principles. So this gives us a clue as to why it's so powerful, because for him, it was connected to his spiritual life. In other words, it wasn't just a political strategy. It wasn't like, let's just go disrupt the government and the status quo to get our way. It was very much a kind of a bigger picture of understanding that the British, for all the harm they were doing to his people and to his country, were also caught up in conditioning, and they were essentially enslaved by the conditioning that they were subjected to.
And he actually said that what got him through was knowing that those British soldiers were really passionate about what they were doing, and they thought what they were doing is right. And so he knew they were caught up, and And even Viktor Frankl said that too in the when he was in the camps. He said, they're all caught up and they're going to suffer greatly more after this war is over than we ever suffered physically. That their mind is going to be their worst enemy because they're going to be racked with guilt over what they did, and so, but they're also caught up, and so you can't. And when if anything, when we look at people that are not fair, or harmful to others, we have to see that, not to get them off the hook, but we have to understand their intention isn't to harm. Like, they're not like, I want to harm, even though that appears that way. They're kind of caught up in this mind of harming for some reason, and it's not conscious. It's almost like a reaction or a conditioned response. And that most of the world, I mean, if we think about it, how many people are individuated in the world? Not many. We're all, most people are caught up in their egos. And so it's just to have an understanding of that helps you find a solution versus fighting back with the anger. Right?
That's right. Easier said than done, of course. We've all felt a surge of anger when it fills the mind. It's very difficult to hold ourselves back from retaliating, from fighting back, from hitting back.
And I love what you say too about duty, because when we think of duty, we often think it's matching the action that was taken against us. Like, I have to defend myself. If they hit me, I have to hit back in some way, whether it's with words or with physical force. But action can be something that, like what Gandhi did in India, was he had them have a day of prayer. He was thinking, how am I going to solve this problem? And he sat in meditation, and I can't remember how many days, but he kept sitting in meditation and knew there was a solution, but he didn't know what it was. And he was just waiting for it to arise with him, but he set that intention. And then eventually this idea came to him of this day of prayer, and he brought together all the different religious leaders. There's so many different religions in India, to unite them all and say, we're on this day, we're all going to have a day of prayer, even though it's not your day of prayer for your particular religion. Let's just state that. And you guys are the leaders, so you can establish that. And then what happened was everyone went on day of prayer and they stopped working. So it was like a strike throughout India, and it made such an impact. So there's two things to learn from that, is that when you're faced with a challenge in the world, like we all are, and there's a particular passion you have, or something you want to change in the world, ask yourself, sit with it. And maybe there's an idea from a deeper, wiser part of yourself that the answer is already there, that's going to be the most effective. And we want to look within and find that spiritual solution to it. And that's what he did. And I think we can do that. And then also that he didn't fight back with violence. He fought back with something that would harm the British Empire by no one working, and everything got stuck. I think it maybe was more than a day. I think it was like a week or something. And so it's just amazing that you can do something that's not violent that can have an impact.
Yes, very powerful. So some of the techniques and practices prescribed in the Gita, we can see them in Gandhi's philosophy and his actions, right? One of them, self-examination, self-inquiry, if you will, and the development, the cultivation of self-awareness. And you can see in his writings, he's very honest about his own temptations and weaknesses. In other words, he was open about, I have these difficulties in managing my emotions, or managing my marriage, and
even harsh with his kids. He was very violent with his children. Like, it was just interesting, right? That came out, and it's like he had to deal with all of that.
I don't know about if he was violent, but he was definitely
hard on them.
Yeah, hard on them. So Gandhi emphasized the importance of self-examination and self-awareness. He believed that understanding one's own motives, desires, and weaknesses was essential for practicing nonviolence. Regular introspection helped individuals identify violent tendencies within themselves and work towards overcoming them. So these violent tendencies, this is part of our nature, right? It's part of our survival strategy. We have it as a defense mechanism, as a way to protect ourselves. And so a discipline, especially a spiritual discipline, is required to tame that energy that's there naturally, that biological energy, right? To transmute it in essence, to channel it in a more creative and spiritual, peaceful way.
And when we think of self-inquiry or self-examination, it's like being honest with ourselves of who we are and being able to face the part of ourselves that we often don't want to look at. And it's very powerful to do that and be brutally honest with yourself. And usually, you know, we talk about Carl Jung. I mean, our whole program is Jungian life coaching. He talks about the shadow and that we project the shadow outward. So when people are violent toward you, it means that there's a part of you, and it doesn't mean you match that violence, but there's a little frustration or a little anger or whatever, a part of that inside you that's why that's showing up. And so why is that there? And examining your own anger. It may not be at the level of that person, but it's like maybe a subtlety, and to be honest, you know, and vulnerable with yourself and compassionate to yourself. And then that kind of loosens up a little bit of how do I deal with this outer situation? We got to deal with the internal conflict first. And that's really the self-awareness and self-examination you're talking about.
Absolutely. Which is, you know, if you recall the yogas when we mentioned or talked about the 4 yogas in one of our podcasts, it would be Raja Yoga, right? It's that meditative, self-reflective element of looking inward, introspection. The other one that he uses Karma Yoga, which is selfless action. And this is very much tied to doing your duty.
And doesn't mean selfless, meaning like just like being a doormat. It means that you are taking the action without an ego.
Right, getting your ego out of the way and really working for the betterment of others and doing good.
Because the ego is only concerned about itself in a way. Yeah.
So non-attachment is an essential part of Karma Yoga. In other words, you do your duty, and for him, his duty was, of course, or he took it upon himself as his dharma. His duty was to liberate India. And so everything was dedicated in that direction. Every action that he took, every thought he took, every meditation, every fasting was dedicated towards that goal. So
for everyone, you're not trying to liberate India right now. So practically, what is your vision? And then how does it serve others? And then as you're taking action, you're dedicating that vision as you take action. And you don't look for the quick fix. You just keep holding that vision and it will come to pass. But if you're always looking at, I took this step, now let's see what happens, or I took this step and that's not working, you're kind of attached still. So you want to take that action with, I know my goal will be reached. I know because it's for the good of all. And if it's not for the good of all, then there's going to be attachment. So it has to have that kind of, everyone's going to be better if I have this goal, right? And so that, and then just holding that in your heart is so, so powerful.
Yes. And the key to non-attachment or taking action with non-attachment is that you focus on taking the action. In other words, once you identify your purpose, your dharma, your true work in life, your duty is to perform those actions that lead to success in that endeavor. You're simply dropping the attachment to the results.
And when it shows up, how fast it shows up, what it looks like. And I love non-attachment too, because many, many times the results we get, our ego judges as wrong, and it may feel like a negative or a setback, but it's actually resetting us to something better. And so that non-attachment helps us stop judging every result as good or bad. It's like, well, let's see, let's open it up. And if you open it up as an opportunity, it becomes an opportunity. If you close it down as a bad thing, it becomes a bad thing. So our mind is so powerful. And if Gandhi was looking at every part of the difficulties of doing this, in every little thing that challenge he had along the way, I think it would, first of all, drive someone mad because you feel frustrated. And so the frustration is a sign that you're attached. Anytime you're frustrated with your results, that means you're attached. It's not a selfless act, it's an ego act.
Yeah, so you can see that performing action in this way requires kind of a deeper philosophy, an understanding of the bigger picture, because we're all conditioned in the opposite direction. We're all conditioned to act for the reward, you know, and the reward itself is conditioning, essentially. We get conditioned to repeat an action by getting a positive result. And so we repeat it. We get conditioned to not repeat an action if we get punished or we don't get the results we want. Therefore, that dropping the attachment to the results liberates us from the conditioning effect of action. It's a very powerful, psychologically, it's a very powerful system that if you practice this, it liberates you. Actions liberate you instead of bind you and condition you.
You know, and another benefit of non-attachment is that when we have goals, it's like our happiness is on hold until we reach that goal. And then we get the goal and then we're like, yay. And then the whole time it's like waiting for that goal, waiting for that goal, waiting for that goal. We can't be happy. But if we're unattached, non-attached, we can be enjoy in the moment in the pursuit of the goal. And you're bringing the happiness into the present moment versus when I get the money, when I get the partner, when I get the award, when I get this this goal that I want, then I'll be happy. It's like you could be happy today, just performing the action toward the goal. And it's like kind of presetting yourself up for happiness, because if you're taking action with love and passion, the result will be love and passion. If you take an action with frustration and anger, the result will be frustration and anger. So it's always what you're putting into the action, the energy, the emotion is going to show up in the result. You can't create out of frustration. I know you told me that many years ago, that you cannot create out of frustration. Like you're kind of wrestling with the world and you're forgetting that the world is not as powerful as you, and you're placing the world having more power. And that's the philosophical idea, is that why would we take non-action? What was the deep philosophical truth?
That's right.
Is that we are not the human being and not the ego.
Yes. Speaking of ego, so there's a couple of quotes. He said, an eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind.
Yeah.
So this striking back, right, this retaliating, escalating the situation simply makes both people blind, essentially, and both people lose instead of kind of reaching a peaceful consensus or a way out of the quagmire of violence and aggression. We just remain stuck there. Whereas nonviolence gives us a way out, a way to proceed.
And of course, this famous quote, you must be the change you want to see in the world, and be the change. And you have to own, like if you want the world to be more loving, that's what you have to be. If you see injustice and then you're angry, you're actually feeding anger into the world. It doesn't mean that you don't take action and that you don't think it's wrong, but you can do that without anger. You could do that with love, and to love for a better world. And that is actually more powerful.
So we can get the sense that this requires a lot of self-discipline and self-mastery, right? And that's the purpose of the teachings of the Gita, that the Gita is presenting a way to discipline your mind, a way to work with your mind, where you can master it so that it serves your higher purpose, that you're not acting out of conditioning. You're not just reacting to the circumstances and striking out or lashing out, because that would simply escalate the situation. Yet you're still doing your duty, meaning you're still achieving those goals. And in his circumstances, he was liberating India.
And I love, in a gentle way, you can shake the world. And there's so much power in not feeding the energy that's coming at you. Whether it's a difficult person, whether it's a group of people that you think are bad and wrong and you want to change them, you can't really force them to change. All you can do is say, how can I create, be in the world and create a world in my mind and a vision and do something that makes a difference that's not violent. And I think there's so many ways, but like you said, we're conditioned to strike back. So we don't know the way for every situation. None of us have all the answers. So we have to meditate. We have to do that self-reflection. What is this showing me about my mind and myself, and setting the intention that the answer will come to you, just like Gandhi did, like allowing that meditation to help you tap into your inner wisdom. And you'll be surprised at the ways that can be very constructive, where you can feel positive, because it never feels positive to fight back and aggression and be angry. None of us want to do that. We want to bring peace. So how do we do that? And we have to start with ourselves.
Yeah, we have a lot of changes to make, and a lot of challenges, the social challenges with the climate, with democracy. And this is an important tool to consider as human beings as we move forward, as we face these challenges. What can we learn from the Gita, from Gandhi's work, that can inspire us and can fortify us to face these challenges?
Great conversation, Rob. I really enjoyed just talking it out. We have these conversations all the time, but on the podcast, I'm always, amazed at what emerges and new ideas. And every time we talk about these topics, we always, it just, you learn about yourself a little more and learn about the world a little more. So I hope you enjoyed this, and we will see you next week on our Soul Sessions podcast. If you haven't subscribed, please do. If you're watching us here on YouTube, click the button in the corner and subscribe to our channel. And we hope to see you next week.